The Mayan Saga, the blood sacrifices behind the calendar of doom. This isn't a myth. It's a warning carved in stone and sealed in blood. For the Maya, time itself was alive, and to keep the universe from collapsing, hearts had to be offered to the gods. And to see how this terror began, we must return to the very first fear. The jungle was alive with a sound that didn't belong. The wet snap of branches deep in the canopy, followed by a cry that wasn't animal and wasn't human. Even the cicadas fell silent, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. This was the heart of the ancient Mayan world, a place where ruins still rose like broken teeth from the earth, and where time felt older than the sun. The year was not some distant mythic past. It was the classic period, when Mayan cities thrived, their pyramids glinting under moons that ruled the night like cold gods. In these vast lowlands of Mesoamerica, modern Guatemala, Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, Belize, the Maya tracked the heavens with an accuracy that still unsettles astronomers today. Their stone calendars weren't crude scratches. They were celestial clocks, each cycle of days tied to cosmic forces they believed could tear the world apart. To them, the universe wasn't stable, it was fragile, kept in balance only by ritual and blood. Every eclipse, every unexpected storm, every failing crop was a whisper that the gods were hungry again. Travelers and scholars who walked these ruins centuries later would marvel at the precision of their mathematics, the beauty of their glyphs. But to the Maya themselves, knowledge was a weapon against chaos. To misread the sky was to invite annihilation. The Tzolk'in, their sacred 260-day calendar, mapped human fate itself, while the Hab, the 365-day solar calendar, tied earthly seasons to divine cycles. Together, they created the calendar round, a cosmic engine that promised rebirth, but warned of disaster if neglected. Archaeologists have uncovered murals where priests in feathered headdresses pull thorns through their own flesh, offering drops of blood to feed the gods. There are carved stelae of kings holding obsidian blades, their captives kneeling before them as living sacrifices. These aren't just symbols of devotion, they are desperate bargains. The Maya believed the sun could stall in the sky, the stars could fall, and the earth could drown in darkness if the gods weren't appeased. Even the cities themselves seemed alive with superstition. Ball courts were built not only for sport but for rituals that could end in death, the loser's blood spilled to renew cosmic order. Temples were designed so that on specific dates the rising or setting sun would pierce their chambers, proof that their calendars and the gods were aligned. But beneath this harmony was a quiet terror. Time wasn't theirs to command. It was a predator circling. When Spanish chroniclers first heard rumors of the calendar, they dismissed it as pagan fancy, but buried codices, some miraculously, surviving the flames of conquest, tell a darker story. Entire villages offering their strongest warriors, entire dynasties timing wars not for strategy but for omens. To them, history wasn't linear. It was a wheel of inevitable endings, and every turn brought the possibility that their world could simply stop. The jungle never forgot. Even today, locals speak of ruins where the air grows unnaturally cold, where shadows linger too long, where time feels slippery, as if the old gods are still watching. The Mayan calendar wasn't just a tool, it was a contract signed in blood. The sacrifices weren't acts of cruelty, they were acts of survival. But in making that pact, they awakened something they could never control, but something else was stirring beneath the surface. Mist hung low over the limestone temples, turning the jungle into a world of shadows and breathless quiet. In the early mornings of the classic Maya cities, priests walked barefoot across dew-soaked stones, their white robes whispering against the earth. To an outsider, it might have seemed peaceful, an ancient civilization in harmony with the stars. The great pyramids caught the first light of dawn, and the soft hum of conch shells signaled another day blessed by the gods. Children played beneath towering stelae carved with intricate glyphs, unaware that every date etched in stone was a warning as much as a record. The Maya revered their calendars as gifts from divine beings, maps of creation handed down in the time. Before time. According to their legends, the gods themselves had built and destroyed worlds 4 times already. This, the 5th world, was fragile and temporary. Yet there was comfort in the cycles. The sun rose, the rains came, the maize grew. Life seemed orderly, predictable. Farmers believed that as long as they planted on the correct dates, the earth would remain fertile. Rulers believed that as long as sacrifices were made at the appointed times, the heavens would remain in balance. On feast days, the plazas glowed with candlelight. Incense drifted upward, curling like smoke toward constellations that the Maya charted with unerring precision. The sacred ballgame echoed with the heavy thump of rubber against stone, the crowd cheering as if their joy itself could please the gods. There was laughter, music, and the deep sense of belonging that comes from knowing one's place in the cosmos. It was easy to believe the gods were benevolent guardians, watching silently from the heavens. But the rituals carried shadows within their beauty. Bloodletting was woven into celebration, not as punishment but as honor. A king might pierce his tongue, or a queen her thigh, offering their own life force so the gods would smile upon their people. The more vital the ceremony, the deeper the sacrifice, proof that even joy was never free of fear. The Maya whispered stories of Ixchel, the moon goddess, weeping blood when balance was broken, or of Camazotz, the death bat, lurking at the edges of the calendar's cycles. At night, when the jungle mist thickened and the torches guttered low, the priests spoke of the long count, a calendar that stretched across eons, charting not just harvests but ages. Its distant endings were said to carry unspeakable change. Most villagers took comfort in knowing such days were far away, lifetimes beyond their own. But some elders muttered that the universe had a way of testing mortals without warning, and that even the gods could grow impatient. Candlelit ceremonies often ended with quiet prayers for protection, not joy. The faithful left offerings of maize and obsidian at hidden shrines deep in the jungle, away from the safety of the cities. Hunters claimed they sometimes found fresh blood on stones far from any village, as if someone or something was renewing the old pacts in secret. The Maya believed their world was a thread stretched taut between creation and destruction, and every ritual was a hand holding that thread steady. But the faintest tremor, a missed date, a forgotten offering, could send it snapping. They lived beneath a sky they trusted, beneath a calendar they revered. Yet in the misty fields, in the whispering dark, the smallest signs already warned that time was not theirs to command. Then came the real shock. The first sign was almost too small to matter. A hunter returned from the jungle with claw marks across his forearm, deep, deliberate, but too far apart to belong to any jaguar. He swore he had been alone, that no animal had been near. The elders told him to burn copal incense and leave an offering at the nearest shrine. Yet in the following days, the wound festered unnaturally, the flesh darkening like wood left too long in the fire. Then came the sickness. Infants were born weak and silent, their cries no louder than a moth's wings. Midwives whispered of a pattern. Each failing birth matched a specific date on the sacred calendar. The same glyph kept appearing in their dreams, an obsidian circle surrounded by jagged teeth. Farmers began to mutter that the stars themselves seemed colder at night, as if some unseen clock had slipped out of place. One morning, villagers discovered 3 maize fields blackened overnight, every stalk twisted as though wrung by invisible hands. The soil itself smelled of iron, like old blood. Dogs refused to go near the fields, their hackles rising at nothing. To the priests, these were omens. They traced the dates, compared the signs, and saw a troubling alignment, an approaching Baktun cycle, the long count measure of cosmic ages. The last time such a cycle had neared completion, their legends warned, the world before theirs had been swallowed whole. The whispers spread faster than the sickness. A child spoke in a voice not her own, reciting ancient prophecies no one had taught her. A merchant claimed to have seen a shadow moving against the stars, something vast, jackal-headed and silent. At the ball court, a captain faltered mid-play, staring at the sky as if it had suddenly shifted. Suspicions took root. People began watching one another too closely, wondering who among them had angered the gods. Some said a priest had miscounted the calendar days. Others accused the ruler's bloodline of arrogance, believing their dynasty immune to cosmic law. A few even whispered of a family rumored to have hidden an offering meant for sacrifice, a stolen heart that should have fed the sky. The jungle itself seemed to respond. Nightbirds stopped singing. Streams that had run clear turned cloudy and bitter. One evening, hunters found fresh footprints by a sacred cenote, bare feet that sank deep into the mud, yet no one had entered the forest. Above the water, a single glyph was etched into the stone, the same jagged, toothed circle that haunted their dreams. In the temples, torches sputtered for no reason. Glyphs carved generations ago seemed to flicker in the torchlight, their meanings shifting like snakes in sand. Priests gathered in hushed meetings, comparing old codices by candlelight. The dates aligned too perfectly, the signs too numerous to ignore. Something was bending time, or perhaps reminding them that time was never theirs to control. Fear turned inward. Friends watched friends for the smallest slip. Pregnant women hid their swelling bellies from envious eyes. The ruler himself began sleeping in his temple chambers. Convinced shadows moved in his royal hall. It was as if the world was waiting for something, or someone, to break the fragile thread holding it together. The claw marks, the blackened fields, the silent births, all pointed to a reckoning their calendars had only hinted at. That was only the first crack in the story. It began quietly, almost politely, a goat missing from its pen, a few stalks of maize bent and broken by unseen hands. But within weeks, the losses multiplied. Entire herds of livestock were found dead at dawn, their bodies unmarked, eyes glassy and wide as if terror alone had stopped their hearts. The air in the villages grew tense, brittle like dry leaves underfoot. People spoke in whispers, watching the tree line where the jungle pressed close, as if the shadows themselves were listening. Neighbors began accusing one another. A farmer claimed his brother-in-law had angered the gods by hoarding offerings. A mother hissed that the midwife's bloodline was cursed. Old grudges turned poisonous. Every dispute became evidence of hidden guilt. Families barricaded their doors at night with stone and wood, muttering prayers older than memory. But the jungle had its own prayers now, strange noises carried on the wind, a low keening that rolled through the trees long after the fires had burned low. The crops began to fail. Fields that had once yielded golden maize now sprouted only brittle husks. The ground cracked as if thirsting for something deeper than rain. Wells turned cloudy and bitter, and even fresh water seemed to carry the faint metallic tang of blood. At night, hunters swore they saw figures moving between the trees, tall, thin shapes that disappeared the instant you tried to focus on them. Children began waking screaming from nightmares they couldn't describe. They spoke of a presence watching them from the corner of their huts, a tall figure whose face was hidden but whose eyes burned like embers. Elders recalled stories of Kamazots, the death bat, and Kukulkan, the feathered serpent, but this felt different, colder, quieter, inevitable. The priests offered more sacrifices, cutting deeper into their own flesh, but the omens only worsened. Fires flickered blue, an ill sign, and temple torches sputtered out even on windless nights. In the ball courts, the players no longer celebrated victories. They played stiffly, mechanically, as if fulfilling an obligation to something they feared to name. By now, no one trusted the calendar's reassurances. The cycles that had once promised order seemed to spiral beyond comprehension. Each glyph, each date carved into the temple walls, looked less like a guide and more like a countdown. Even the jungle animals seemed restless. Jaguars prowled dangerously close to villages, and flocks of birds abandoned their roosts en masse, vanishing into the night. The sky itself seemed to dim earlier, the sun retreating before its time. Even under a full moon, the world felt unnaturally dark, as if light itself were withdrawing. Conversations dwindled into silence, and silence curdled into dread. Everyone knew something was deeply wrong, though no one dared speak the full fear aloud. And from there, everything grew darker. They gathered in secret, deep in the jungle where the ruined temples crumbled under creeping vines, carrying bundles of garlic and salt as if such things could stop a god. Mothers tied red threads around their children's wrists. Fathers burned resinous copal until the smoke stung their eyes. Under a moon swallowed by clouds, the villagers whispered prayers so old even the priests had forgotten their origins. But beneath every whispered chant was the same unspoken truth. They didn't believe these charms would hold. Not anymore. The elders ordered sacred nights of silence. On those nights, No fire was to be lit, no door opened, no name spoken aloud. They said sound itself could draw the attention of whatever stalked them. So families huddled together in the dark, clutching one another, their breath shallow, waiting for dawn. Outside, something prowled among the trees. Sometimes it scraped claws across the walls of the huts, a faint rasping sound that froze every muscle. Sometimes it laughed, a hollow, distant echo that made the air taste of metal. Priests reopened ancient codices, long thought forbidden. By candlelight, they traced glyphs older than their cities, searching for a remedy. They whispered of a blood debt unpaid, a miscounted cycle, a broken pact. One prophecy spoke of a doorway between worlds, a thin place where time unraveled. If the offering was not restored, the doorway would widen, and the gods themselves would walk among the living, no longer as guides but as predators. So they prepared another sacrifice. This time, it wasn't a captured warrior or a criminal. It was a volunteer, a young woman whose family line carried the memory of the gods' first gift of maize. She walked barefoot to the altar, wrapped in white cotton, her hair braided with jade beads. As she ascended the temple steps, the jungle fell silent, as if holding its breath. The priests promised the people that this offering would reset the balance, close the wound between worlds. When the obsidian blade flashed and the heart was lifted to the sky, a faint tremor rippled through the ground. For a moment, the villagers thought they had succeeded. The torches steadied. The air seemed lighter. Children dared to speak again. But then, somewhere beyond the tree line, a single long howl rolled across the hills. Not a wolf, not a jaguar, but something older, hungrier. The smoke from the temple fires twisted unnaturally, coiling upward before snapping downward like a striking snake. The heart on the altar still pulsed once, even after it had left the girl's chest. The priests panicked, though they tried not to show it. They ordered more offerings, blood from their own veins, food cast into the sacred cenotes, songs sung until their throats were raw. Secret gatherings formed among the villagers, separate from the official rituals. In hidden caves, they carved protective sigils into stone, scattering salt at every entrance. Mothers whispered new prayers to unnamed powers, desperate to reach anything that might listen. But their efforts felt brittle, like weaving a dam from spider silk. Livestock continued to vanish. Crops rotted in the fields. The nights grew longer, as if time itself were stretching to accommodate something vast. Even the stars seemed to change positions, their familiar patterns shifting subtly, mockingly. One evening, a child disappeared from a locked hut. The door had remained barred from within. There were no footprints outside, no signs of struggle, only a faint circle of ash in the center of the floor. That night, the villagers gathered at the edge of the jungle, clutching garlic, salt, and obsidian knives. No one spoke. They could feel something moving among the trees, watching, waiting. The sense of inevitability settled like a shroud. These measures, garlic strung across thresholds, salt poured in trembling hands, sacred nights of silence, were only stalling the inevitable. The Maya had lived their lives by a calendar that promised order, but now even the dates felt false. Something ancient had already crossed the line between worlds. The protections weren't shields, they were last, desperate gestures before the storm. And then, on a night when the moon hung low and red, a priest broke the silence. He whispered an invocation forbidden for generations, a name meant never to be spoken. The ground beneath the village groaned like a waking beast. In that instant, the air split with a sound like tearing cloth, and a wind colder than death swept through the jungle. That moment opened a door that should have stayed closed. The first corpse they buried was the young woman whose heart had been taken on the temple steps. But when the priests returned at dawn to bless her grave, the earth had sunk unnaturally, as if something beneath had stirred. They quickly packed more soil, pressing it down with stones. No one spoke of it aloud, but that night every villager dreamed of her face, eyes open, lips moving silently in the dark. As more bodies fell, hunters gone missing, children vanishing and later found lifeless, the burials grew frantic and strange. They drove wooden stakes through the chests of the dead, not to dishonor them, but to keep their spirits from wandering. Heavy stones were stacked over fresh graves, and obsidian shards were slipped under tongues to anchor souls to their bodies. Nails, crude and iron black, were hammered into limbs to bind the dead to the earth. The elders claimed these rituals were ancient, older than the pyramids themselves, revived now only out of sheer terror. The jungle began to whisper at night. Villagers heard faint footsteps circling their huts, bare feet dragging slowly through the dust. Shadows lengthened where no light should have cast them. One farmer swore he saw his recently buried brother standing at the edge of the maize field, watching silently. The figure vanished. When he called out, but the next morning, the brother's grave was disturbed. The stones scattered as if by unseen hands. Priests tried to calm the people, insisting the burials had worked, that the souls were at peace. But in secret, even they began sleeping with blades at hand. During one moonless night, a midwife woke to the sound of fingernails scratching at her door. She opened it to find no one. Only 5 small bloody fingerprints smeared across the lintel. The next day, she collapsed without warning. Her heart stopped. At the sacred cenote, divers found objects that should never have been there. Blood-soaked garments weighted with stones, tiny amulets marked with glyphs for binding and silence, and a jawbone wedged open with a shard of jade. These weren't offerings, they were evidence of desperate measures. The priests realized what this meant. Even water, the pathway to the underworld, was no longer safe. It wasn't only the fear of restless spirits, it was the certainty that death had become porous. The Maya had always believed in cycles, creation, destruction, rebirth. But this felt different, like the rules had been broken. Each burial was a plea. Stay down, stay silent, don't bring the darkness with you. Yet each morning brought new signs. Stones shifted, stakes loosened, trails of ash leading away from graves. Families stopped holding proper funerals, fearing that even the rites themselves might draw attention. Instead, bodies were burned in secret. The ashes scattered across rivers where the currents could carry them far from the village. But still, voices whispered on the wind, names spoken in tones too soft for human throats. Children claimed to see familiar faces peering through the tree line, faces of those who should have been far beyond this world. The jungle had become a place of echoes and unfinished stories. The line between the living and the dead had frayed beyond recognition, because some of the dead refused to stay buried. In the moonless hush that followed the last sacrifice, the jungle seemed to hold its breath. Then, from the deepest shadows between the ceiba trees, something vast and skeletal unfurled. Its skin a lattice of obsidian shards, its eyes 2 pits of smoldering embers. It did not walk so much as glide, its edges flickering like dying firelight. The air turned bitter and cold, and every cicada fell silent. Somewhere far off, a child cried out, then nothing. And if you listen, even now, some nights the jungle still trembles because what they buried was never meant to stay underground.